So I'm joined by Chris Slight, who's Managing Director of Off-Highway Research, which specialises in market research and forecasting in the global off-highway equipment sector. And Off-Highway Research has just released an interesting new report, which looks at the impact of a decision by the Trump administration to expand tariffs on imported steel and aluminium. And the expansion of these tariffs flew under the radar a little bit, I think, when compared to the highly publicised Liberation Day tariffs of February this year. But as we're about to find out, their impact on the US construction equipment buyers is likely to be significant. So we'll talk a bit about how they work and their impact in a moment. But Chris, I thought it would be useful, first of all, to remind ourselves about the size of the US construction equipment market so we get a sense of the scale of what we're talking about here. So first of all, perhaps you can tell us how much construction equipment the US buys each year and how much it imports.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Neil. It's a simple question with no simple answer, so I'm going to throw a few things at you here. First of all, off-highway research, how we measure the market, we look at certain specific types of equipment, and really we cover the mainstream machine types across compact equipment, earth moving, lifting, and road building. So the market size for those machines last year was 285,000 units, give or take, and we put the value at around 49.5 billion US dollars. So of those equipment types that we look at, the US has been a net importer for a long time, really since the late 80s, early 1990s, with one or two rare exceptions. So there are some machines that are made in the US that have an export market, and quite a lot of machines that are imported, predominantly excavators from Asia. So there's a little bit of give and take in that. But in our measure of the market, the US has net imports of about 26% of what it consumes in unit terms. And we would put the value of those imports last year at about 12 billion US dollars. So that's the off-highway research specific definition. A broader definition you can get by looking at the statistics that are put out by the United States International Trade Commission. And so if you look up the statistics that relate to construction equipment, the main groups, the imports the US made last year were 19.4 billion US dollars worth. So that's quite a bit higher than the off-highway research figure. But bear in mind that's everything under those tariff codes. So that would be used equipment, whereas as off-highway research, we only look at new machines. It would include probably quite a lot of parts, which are often shipped under the same HS code as kind of the parent machine. So if you take the view that that sort of 26% import ratio that we came up with, then that would imply that the total value of the market is about 75 billion US dollars compared to the pure off-highway research figure of about 45, 46 billion. And the final thing I would throw out is that there's a general rule of thumb that equipment costs on a construction project are about 5%. The value of construction put in place last year in the US, based on Census Bureau figures, was 2.15 trillion US dollars. So 5% of that is about 107 billion. So very long answer to a very short question. So you're probably somewhere in the range of, our figure 45, 46 billion is an underestimate, and the maximum it would probably be that 107 billion US dollar figure.
Can you tell us how these tariffs work? What exactly is being taxed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to say is that the tariff is an import tax. It is paid in the US when goods are landed in the US. So there's, there is a bit of a myth to dispel there. It's not somehow being paid in the exporting country and the people of that country or the industry of that country is paying it. It is being paid in the US by the US business, which is importing it, and that is either passed on to consumer or obviously in the case of e-commerce, sometimes the consumer is buying directly from overseas, so they're paying that themselves. Um, that tax is based on the declared value of the goods. So obviously, with every bill of lading, everything that's imported, there's a value that's declared, and the tariff is paid as that is as those goods are landed and let into the US. So in the so-called Liberation Day tariffs, you saw tariffs set across all goods based on the country of origin. And they range from 10% as kind of the baseline. And obviously there's a little bit of horse trading, but they ranged up to around 50% for what is seen by the administration as the more sort of egregious abusers of the US consumer. So they were applicable to all goods, and the basis for that was the country of origin. What you're seeing now, what was announced in August under Section 232 tariffs, was a blanket 50% tariff based on the value of the steel or aluminium content of a product, regardless of the country of origin. So, and this is why it's important for construction equipment, but has possibly gone under the radar elsewhere, and that is because construction equipment has a huge steel content. Um, for the purposes of our model, we based a figure of about 90% steel content by value. So if your construction machine is coming in, you're going to pay 50% additional import tax on the 90% that's steel, and then the remaining 10% is whatever underlying tariff there was based on the country of origin. The reality of that is that the country of origin really doesn't matter that much anymore because the steel content is so high, that's going to be the dominant tax. Regardless of the country of origin, the importer will pay somewhere between a 40 and 50% tariff on a piece of construction equipment.
What's the impact if you are a US buyer of an imported machine?
Yeah, so if you're a US buyer, you won't be paying the tariffs directly unless you are personally importing that, which is unlikely given the distribution model in this industry. But the cost that these tariffs add will probably be passed on to you. As I said, the country of origin is much less relevant now because these steel tariffs dominate. So if you're buying an imported machine, you could be paying 40 to 50% more than you previously were. I think this kind of opens up an interesting point is that, okay, and so the point of these tariffs is to buy American made goods. So clearly that if that product is available from, a US factory, then it would steer the buyer somewhat towards that by the price differential. Although, as we'll discuss, US manufacturers will also feel a big price hit. But there are certain products that, really not made in the US, or there isn't much production capacity, or only one supplier makes them. So if you look at things like mobile cranes, they're mostly made in Germany, Japan, and China, and there isn't much production these days in the US. You could say the same for road building equipment. And once you get into the niche equipment types, again, that would apply. So for some of those buyers who are looking at somewhat specialized equipment, they may not have an option other than to just swallow this huge price increase if they really need that machine. But the thing it will do, I think, is it will steer people, because the tariff is pretty much the same, it will probably steer people to cheaper machines. And there was a letter that one of the readers of KHL's Crane magazines posted, a big fleet owner in the US who pointed out the fact that this will probably steer US buyers towards Chinese cranes, which is absolutely not the aim of the Trump administration, but that's the reality because the starting price is so much lower compared to products made in Germany or Japan. So that there are unintended consequences here, and that's just one example.
All right. So you've just mentioned there that there is going to be a price hit to US manufacturers as well. Perhaps you can tell us a bit more about the scale of that impact, and what it means for US buyers of US made equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reality of this industry and any manufacturing industry is that supply chains are global. And back when the April tariffs were announced, a couple of manufacturers in their investor relations materials just put out some illustrative pie charts for US made equipment, American machines, but just illustrating where their supply chains were. And by and large, it was 70% US components and 30% from other parts of the world. So the problem that those manufacturers will face now is that those components, which again are mostly steel because the machine is mostly steel, will come into the country and face these tariffs of around 40 to 50%, basically. So those manufacturers that are making, American machines will be seeing big cost increases that they will have to pass on to their customers. The second tier of this is that, obviously components have components and so on down the supply chain. So even if you're putting an American component in an American made machine, there will inevitably be foreign content in that. If you consider a finished machine, the only way there's not going to be a cost increase on that is if every single atom in that machine was mined on US soil and never left the country and came back in. And clearly that isn't the case. That's never really been the case in the history of industry, and certainly in our interconnected world. Components cross national borders many, many times before they end up in the finished product.
Is there a way for US buyers of construction equipment to escape the impact of these tariffs, either partly or altogether, perhaps?
I don't think it's possible to escape the impact of these tariffs altogether, because as I said, even if an American machine is made with all American components, there is going to be some foreign content, and that cost will inevitably be passed on. So every single buyer of construction equipment is going to see a price increase because manufacturers will simply have to pass these costs on. Um, Obviously, that cost increase is lessened for American-made machines with high American content. So yes, that is the point of the tariffs. That is what the administration is trying to do. In some cases, that might be possible, certainly for the kind of the broader, higher volume general equipment. But as I said before, if you're in anything that looks remotely like a niche where there are only a handful of suppliers and they're not American or they don't manufacture in America, then you're probably going to see big cost increases and not many options. I wouldn't have thought to kind of sidestep them.
So finally, what does this mean for the manufacturers themselves, whether they're based in the US or overseas? What can they do to limit the impact on buyers? And could some US manufacturers actually go the other way and increase the prices of their machines?
Yes, so the point of the tariffs is to encourage US manufacturing. So it could steer manufacturers to set up factories or set up a more substantial footprint in the US. Um, it's not a straightforward decision in construction equipment because it's a relatively low volume business. And manufacturers might do that and escape some of the hit on tariffs, but if they don't have the scale, if they have to invest a lot of time and money in establishing a local supply chain, then big picture, there might not be any savings. Um, I think the other point as well is that, even if a manufacturer goes, okay, we want to serve the US market, therefore we have to manufacture in the US, there is always going to be some sort of imported element. So the tariffs are somewhat inescapable. And then I think the question for the manufacturers is, okay, well, I need to minimize that. What is the cheapest I can buy that component? And going back to what I was saying about finished equipment, that probably steers buyers towards the countries that the Trump administration doesn't want to steer them towards. If they're looking to procure a relatively dumb component, China is probably going to be one of the countries that is on the list, is probably available. You know, China will be one of the cheapest suppliers. And as these Section 232 tariffs have pretty much leveled up the cost regardless of country of origin, then that buyer that might have previously, gone to a more favored partner from the Trump administration's point of view will probably go, yeah, okay, China's it. I don't have any choice on price, so there we go. So I think that this issue of unintended consequences is quite a significant one. So not only will these tariffs add cost for US industry and US consumers, I'm not entirely convinced they will achieve the aims that the administration wants them to.
Very interesting. Thank you, Chris. It's a complex topic, but one you've managed to summarize very concisely for us.
Great. Thanks for having me, Neil. Thank you.